Hello, welcome to the very first episode of Intellivision. My name is Aaron Wallach, and today I'll be talking about cults and how they are created. Be sure to like this video and subscribe, as well as check out the description below for links to some of the resources I'll be utilizing in this video. So today we'll be looking at a section of Robert Greene's best-selling book, The 48 Laws of Power. He offers a very concise and easy to comprehend outline of what cults are and how they are formed and maintained, as well as why we should know about this topic in the first place. Before I get into all of this, though, I just want to clarify some things regarding this book. Many critics of Robert Greene's book on power have voiced concerns over the book's intent, and most, if not all of them, have condemned it as one that promotes malicious and greedy behavior. Now, I think that this book certainly has a potential for that, but ultimately their concerns are missing the point. Robert Greene isn't trying to turn his readers into manipulative power grabbers. Rather, he is mainly giving us an education in real-world dynamics. He argues in his preface to the book that humans are by nature creatures who desire power, and that because this desire is universal, it wouldn't be helpful for us to be ignorant of how power works and how people use it in everyday life. Okay, having said all of this, let's get into the topic of today's video. Okay, so in Robert Greene's book, he outlines the 27th law as follows. Play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following. And then he follows this by what he calls a judgment, in which he says, people have an overwhelming desire to believe in something. Become the focal point of such desire by offering them a cause, a new faith to follow. Keep your words vague but full of promise. Emphasize enthusiasm over rationality and clear thinking. Give your new disciples rituals to perform. Ask them to make sacrifices on your behalf. In the absence of organized religion and grand causes, your new belief system will bring you untold power. Okay, so that's a little opener of the section. And what follows is the science of charlatanism, or how to create a cult in 5 easy steps. Okay, so he's offering us a series of steps for how to create a cult and how to become, I guess, a charlatan yourself. Okay, so he says, in searching for the methods that will gain you the most power for the least effort, you will find the creation of a cult-like following one of the most effective. Having a large following opens up all sorts of possibilities for deception. Not only will your followers worship you, they will defend you from your enemies and will voluntarily take on the work of enticing others to join your fledgling cult. This kind of power will lift you to another realm. You will no longer have to struggle or use subterfuge to enforce your will. You are adored and can do no wrong. Okay, so you might think it a gargantuan task to create such a following, but in fact it's fairly simple. As humans, we have a desperate need to believe in something, anything. This makes us eminently gullible. We simply cannot endure long periods of doubt or of the emptiness that comes from a lack of something to believe in. Dangle in front of us some new cause, elixir, get-rich-quick scheme, or the latest technological trend or art movement, and we leap from the water as one to take the bait. Look at history. The chronicles of the new trends and cults that have made a mass following for themselves could fill a library. After a few centuries, a few decades, a few years, even a few months, they generally looked ridiculous, but at the time they seemed so attractive, so transcendental, and so divine. Always in a rush to believe in something, we will manufacture saints and faiths out of nothing. Do not let this gullibility go to waste. Make yourself the object of worship. Make people form a cult around you. Okay, so in this section, Robert Greene is sort of enveloping us in the world of the charlatan. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to follow these steps yourselves. You can sort of take this to just be an outline of kind of the nature of charlatanism. And in the following section, he'll go over the various steps that charlatans have made throughout history, as well as modern day charlatans. Okay, so step one is keep it vague and keep it simple. To create a cult, you must first attract attention. Uh, this you should do not through actions, which are too clear and readable, but through words, which are hazy and deceptive. Your initial speeches, conversations, and interviews must include two elements. On the one hand, the promise of something great and transformative, and on the other, a total vagueness. This combination will stimulate all kinds of hazy dreams in your listeners, who will make their own connections and see what they want to see. To make your vagueness attractive, use words of great resonance, but cloudy meaning, words full of heat and enthusiasm. As a corollary to its vagueness, your appeal should also be simple. Most people's problems have complex causes, deep-rooted neurosis, interconnected social factors, roots that go way back in time and are exceedingly hard to unravel. Few people, however, have the patience to deal with this. Most people just want to hear that a simple solution will cure all of their problems. Things like good old country remedies, mysterious panaceas, and primitive, primitive solutions of our ancestors. Okay, so that's the first step. Step two is emphasize the visual and the sensual over the intellectual. Once people have begun to gather around you, two dangers will present themselves: boredom and skepticism. Boredom will make people go elsewhere. Skepticism will allow them to think rationally about whatever it is you are offering, blowing away the mist you have artfully created and revealing your ideas for what they are. You need to amuse the bored and ward off the cynics. The best way to do this is through theater or other devices of its kind. Surround yourself with luxury, dazzle your followers with visual splendor, fill their eyes with spectacle. You might even tickle the mind, perhaps by using new technological gadgets to give your cult a pseudo-scientific veneer, as long as you do not make anyone really think. Use the exotic, like distant cultures, strange customs, to create theatrical effects, and to make the most banal and ordinary affairs seem like signs of something extraordinary. Okay, so the first two steps are keeping it vague and keeping it simple. The second step is to emphasize the visual and the sensual over the intellectual and rational. Okay, so step three is borrow the forms of organized religion to structure the group. And I found this one to be especially interesting. Your cult-like following is growing. It is time to organize it. Find a way both elevating and comforting. Organized religions have long held unquestioned authority for large numbers of people, and continue to do so in our supposedly secular age. The lofty and holy associations of organized religion can be endlessly exploited. Create rituals for your followers. Organize them into a hierarchy, ranking them in grades of sanctity and giving them names and titles that resound with religious overtones. Ask them for sacrifices that will fill your coffers and increase your power. To emphasize your gathering's quasi-religious nature, talk and act like a prophet. You are not a dictator after all. You are a priest, a guru, a sage, a shaman, or any other word that hides your real power in the midst of religion. Step 4. Disguise your source of income. Your group has grown, you have structured it in a church-like form. Your coffers are beginning to fill with your followers' money. Yet you must never be seen as hungry for money and the power it brings. It is at this moment that you must disguise the source of your income. Okay. Your followers want to believe that if they follow you, all sorts of good things will fall into their lap. By surrounding yourself with luxury, you become living proof of the soundness of your belief system. Never reveal that your wealth actually comes from your followers' pockets. Instead, make it seem to come from the truth of your methods. Followers will copy your each and every move in the belief that it will bring them the same results. and their imitative enthusiasm will blind them to the charlatan nature of your wealth. Step 5, and this I consider to be the most important step, so take notes or at least listen up on this one. Set up an us versus them dynamic. Set up an us versus them dynamic. The group is now large and thriving, a magnet attracting more and more particles. If you are not careful, though, inertia will set in, and time and boredom will demagnetize the group. To keep your followers united, you must now do what all religions and belief systems have done in the past. Create an us versus them dynamic. Okay, first, make sure your followers believe that they are part of an exclusive club, unified by a bond of common goals. Second, to strengthen this bond, manufacture the notion of a devious enemy out to ruin you. Okay, so there's two parts of this step. First is making sure your followers believe that they're an exclusive club, one bound by common goals. The second part of this step is to manufacture the notion of a devious enemy out to ruin you. So create an other for your group that's out for your group in order to strengthen your group's bond. Robert Greene goes on to say that there is a force of non-believers that will do anything to stop you. So he's elaborating on this second part of the step. Any outsider who tries to reveal the charlatan nature of your belief system cannot be described as a member of this devious force. If you have no enemies, invent one. Given a straw man to react against, your followers will tighten and cohere. They have your cause to believe in and infidels to destroy. Okay, so after talking about these steps, Robert Greene goes on to give what he calls observances of the law, which are basically just some examples of historical figures who followed this law. So he offers multiple observances, but I'm just going to talk about one that I think is especially illustrative of this law. And that is one of someone named Franz Mesmer. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but he was a doctor and scientist who lived in the 18th century. And at the age of 55, he was at a crossroads. He was a pioneer in the study of animal magnetism, the belief that animals contain magnetic matter and that a doctor or specialist can effect miraculous cures by working on his charged substance, on this charged substance. But in Vienna, where he lived, his theories had met with scorn and ridicule from the medical establishment. In treating women for convulsions, Mesmer claimed to have worked on a number of cures, his proudest achievement being the restoration of sight to a blind girl. But another doctor who examined the young girl said she was blind as ever, an assessment with which she herself agreed. So Mesmer countered that his enemies were out to slander him by winning her over to their side. So already we kind of see sort of the fifth step here. Mesmer is already trying to create an us versus them dynamic, right? He has enemies out to slander him, disprove his theory, out of malice, right? It's not because his theory is quack, which it really was, but it's rather his enemies are just out to get him. Right? This claim only elicited more ridicule. Clearly, the sober-minded Viennese were the wrong audience for his theories, and so he decided to move to Paris and start again. So, moving to Paris, he rented a splendid apartment in the new city, and he decorated it appropriately. Stained glass in most of the windows created a religious feeling, and mirrors on all the walls produced an hypnotic effect. So if we go back to the steps here, we see that he's already emphasizing the visual and the sensual over the intellectual, right? He wants to create a hypnotic effect, right, for his followers. He doesn't care about the intellectual soundness of his theory, right? Okay, so the doctor advertised that in his apartment he would give demonstrations of the powers of animal magnetism, inviting the diseased and melancholic to feel its powers. Okay, so Animal magnetism, right? What exactly is animal magnetism? It seems like a pretty vague concept, which then goes back to step one, right? Keeping it vague and keeping it simple. Um, so that's kind of what I take this part to be about here. Um, then Robert Greene goes on to say, soon Parisians of all classes, but mostly women, were paying for entry to witness the miracles that Mesmer promised. Okay, so inside the apartment, the scents of orange blossom and exotic incense wafted through special vents. As the initiates filtered into the salon where the demonstrations took place, they heard harp music and the lulling sounds of a female vocalist coming from another room. So, kind of going back again to step two, he's creating more of that hypnotic effect to sort of cover up the intellectual vagueness and unsoundness of his theory, right? Okay, so I'm going to skip a little uh, past the next section of this observance onto this part right here. Um, After a few minutes, a kind of delirium would overcome the women. So he's talking about here, as he's testing his theory on all of his followers, he creates a state of delirium that overcomes mostly women. There are some men who come, but it was mostly women who wanted to see this spectacle. Some would sob, some would shriek and tear their hair. Others would laugh hysterically. At the height of the delirium, Mesmer would re-enter the salon, dressed in a flowing silk robe embroidered with golden flowers, and carried a white magnetic rod. Moving around the container, he would stoke and soothe the patients until calm was restored. Many women would later attribute the strange power he had on them to his piercing look, which they thought was exciting or quieting the magnetic fluids in their bodies. So, according to his theory, there's a sort of like magnetic fluid running in the bodies of people that he can manipulate in order to cure them of various ailments, right? So that was a theory. And instead of, giving intellectual arguments or trying to justify his theory on scientific grounds, uh, he produced a kind of delirium in the patients. So within months of his arrival in Paris, Mesmer became all the rage. His supporters included Marie Antoinette herself, the Queen of France, wife of Louis XVI. As in Vienna, he was condemned by the official faculty of medicine, but that did not matter. His growing following of pupils and patients paid him handsomely. So I'm going to skip a little bit more to this part right here. At the height of Mesmer's popularity, a French commission published a report based on years of testing the theory of animal magnetism. Okay, so we got all the real scientific authorities on the matter now, trying to figure out, you know, what was what this was all about, with Mesmer. The conclusion was that magnetism's effects on the body actually came from a kind of group hysteria and autosuggestion, right? The report was well documented and ruined Mesmer's reputation in France, so Mesmer ended up getting caught. He left the country and went to retirement. Only a few years later, however, imitators sprang up all over Europe, and the cult of mesmerism spread once again. Its believers more numerous than ever. So even though his own theory was disproven, right, by France's scientific authorities, um, the cult of mesmerism formed. So even though his theory, like his own practice, died, the cult remained and it flourished. That's how powerful creating a cult-like following can be. Okay, so Robert Greene's interpretation of this. So Mesmer's career can be broken into two parts. When still in Vienna, he clearly believed in the validity of his theory and did all he could to prove it. But his growing frustration and the disapproval of his colleagues made him adopt another strategy. First, he moved to Paris, where no one knew him and where his extravagant theories found a more fruitful soil. Then he appealed to the French love of theater and spectacle, making his apartment into a kind of magical world in which a sensory overload of smells, sights, and sounds entranced his customers. Most important, from now on he practices magnetism only on a group. The group provided the setting in which the magnetism would have its proper effect, one believer infecting the other, overwhelming any individual doubter. Mesmer thus passed from being a confirmed advocate of magnetism to the role of a charlatan, using every trick in the book to captivate the public. This is the lesson that Mesmer teaches us. Our tendency to doubt, the distance that allows us to reason, is broken down when we join a group. The warmth and infectiousness of the group overwhelm the skeptical individual. You lead them into mistaking their feelings for signs of your mystical strength. The most effective cults mix religion with science. Okay, so that's sort of the interpretation of the events that uh, happened with Franz Mesmer. Um, and we can see throughout his story that he utilized a lot of these different steps, right? He used step one, step two, step three, all of them in some sort of way. So that just goes to show that Robert Greene steps are applicable um, in a lot of cases throughout history and in the modern day as well. So Robert Greene at the end of this section, he gives a really good image of that really sort of embodies this law. So his image is the magnet. An unseen force draws objects to it, which in turn become magnetized themselves, drawing other pieces to them, the magnetic power of the whole constantly increasing. But take away the original magnet, and it all falls apart. Become the magnet, the invisible force that attracts people's imaginations and holds them together. Once they have clustered around you, no power can wrest them away. Authority. And authority for Robert Greene is basically some figure, some historical figure who embodies the law really well in a quote. So this authority happens to be Gret du Francisco, and he says, the charlatan achieves his great power by simply opening a possibility for men to believe what they already want to believe. The credulous cannot keep at a distance. They crowd around the wonder worker, entering his personal aura, surrendering themselves to illusion with a heavy solemnity, like cattle. Okay, so this is Law 27. Play on people's need to believe to create a cult-like following. So I guess a modern day application for this law is especially in the year 2021, with all of the political turmoil going on, we can see sort of a cult-like following popping up, whether on the right or the left. Um, and I think that just having a knowledge of the nature of cults and how they're formed and how figures can form them in 5 easy steps, I think is really useful. Not necessarily in order for us to create our own cult. I'm not sure if that's the best idea right now or ever, but just making us aware of how cults work can help us recognize them and be self-aware of ourselves and of others who we might admire, but who may be forming a cult themselves that we find ourselves being um, sort of lured into. So yeah, I guess that could be one possible modern day application of this law. Robert Greene likes to offer a lot of historical figures to illustrate his laws, but I think there clearly is that modern day utilization of his 27th law.